Hey everyone, today we're beginning a new sermon series called Go. We're always hopeful to have you with us for worship, but we especially want to invite you to be online with us for the next 2 weeks for parts 2 and 3 as we explore how every one of us has a part to play in God's story everywhere we go and in everything we do. Today we begin with the call to ministry of the ancient prophet Isaiah, and it's an interesting and frankly challenging story. We read about his visionary experience in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. King Uzziah's death was a significant historical marker for the ancient Judeans. King Uzziah had been one of the better kings of Judah, and for the most part, he had honored God and been a very effective leader for the nation over 35 years. But Uzziah did not finish well. Pride led him to make a rash and disobedient decision, and he wound up with leprosy. He spent the last decade of his life governing from isolation through his son Jotham until his death around 740 BC. The death of a king who had reigned for a long time was disruptive, and it caused a great deal of uncertainty like all destabilizing events do. In our country, we did not feel the same on September the 12th of 2001 as we did on September the 10th. And just last year, we did not feel the same on January the 7th as we did on January the 5th. In a similar way, Uzziah's death was unsettling for the ancient Judeans. Disruptive, unsettling events drive us to seek God more eagerly. When our lives are in crisis, we go searching for guidance, comfort, and strength. It's not surprising that Isaiah had his visionary experience in the year that King Uzziah died. If Isaiah was looking for comfort, he got something other than what he was looking for. In his vision, he saw the Almighty God high and lifted up. And as enormous as the temple was, it could not contain the entirety of God's presence. The room was filled with the lower part of God's robe. God was being worshiped by fiery creatures with 6 wings who spoke with voices so loud that their words shook the temple like an earthquake and filled the temple with smoke. It was like a scene from a Steven Spielberg film. And so how did Isaiah respond? Did he sing along with the seraphs? Did he turn to his neighbor and say, Wow, the choir is on it today. The band is hot. What an awesome message. And the donuts were off the chain. That's, of course, not how Isaiah responded. What Isaiah experienced was hardly a Norman Rockwell-style painting of God as a kind old gentleman with a long beard, clothed in a flowing white robe, sitting on a cloud surrounded by flying babies. His vision was not comforting. It was astonishing. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. In the presence of an awesome, holy God, Isaiah was like an ant watching an eagle soar. He must have felt as insignificant as a grain of sand next to a mountain range, like a drop of rain on the beach next to an ocean. It was a profound experience of God's holiness, and it was utterly alien to Isaiah. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. A sinful human in the presence of a righteous God, a mere mortal in the presence of the everlasting. In that moment, he came face to face with his truth. He was lost. He was undone. In the presence of the one who is everything, Isaiah realized his complete insignificance and his entirely flawed nature. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Remember the saying of Jesus, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Isaiah came face to face with the reality of his authentic identity as a fallen and broken human being. His eyes were opened. He saw himself for who he really was and his people for who they really were. He did not like what he saw. In an act of grace, one of those monstrous creatures took a red-hot burning coal from the altar. How do we know it was burning hot? Well, the text says it was a live coal, and this incredible creature who could speak loud enough to make the earth shake picked it up with tongs. That's hot. The creature flew to Isaiah, touched Isaiah's lips with the cleansing fire of the coal, and declared Isaiah guiltless. In that moment, Isaiah was transformed from unrighteous to righteous, from guilty to forgiven, from a profane existence to a sacred calling, revealed in his next words. For the first time in this visionary experience, Isaiah heard the Lord speak. Who will I send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah answered, I'll go. Here I am. Send me. Isaiah found peace, and Isaiah also found purpose. It really isn't fair to the biblical text to end with verse 8. In the next verses, God describes Isaiah's mission to his own people, a people who would hear but not understand, who would see but not perceive, people whose hearts were hard and calloused, whose ears were stopped up, whose eyes were closed, people who would be stubborn and resistant until everything they loved was laid to waste, and there was only the tiniest seed left to rebuild. Verse 8 leaves us with a happy, heroic ending. The next verses paint the seriousness and the difficulty of Isaiah's mission. The man who said, "Here am I, send me," then asked God a question. "Oh Lord, how long is this going to take?" Isaiah found purpose, but his task would not be easy. So what can we learn from Isaiah's story? Well, sometimes we wish for affirmation when God offers transformation. Sometimes we want God to clarify the uncertainty of our lives when God invites us into deeper mystery and deeper water. Sometimes we want God to make our lives easier, but God invites us to a higher and harder challenge. If you remember the New Testament story of the day that Jesus lost it and started tossing over the tables of the merchants in the temple, then we have to be mindful that that same Jesus might want to turn over our tables too. Worshiping God can be a dangerous thing. Isn't it true that sometimes we participate in worship just to check a box? When we aren't looking for change, and honestly, we'd like to avoid it. When we want to hear music that we like and a message that tickles our ears, and we'd like to go on with our day pretty much undisturbed. It's different when our lives get disrupted by crisis. We worship hungry. We worship eagerly. We worship with open eyes and open ears and an open mind and an open heart. We're desperate for God to speak, to show up, to make our situation something different than what it is. God met Isaiah at the point of his need, but God also expanded Isaiah's awareness of need, not just his own, but that of others. You and I may not have Isaiah's visionary experience, but God also meets us at the point of our need. And God invites us to serve divine purpose, just like he did Isaiah. An authentic encounter with God not only puts us in touch with our own deepest needs, but also with the deepest needs of others. A real meeting with God leads to real change, and that change is demonstrated in expanded horizons of concern. Inward grace necessarily leads to outward growth. At the turn of the 16th century, Copernicus recognized that the sun does not revolve around the earth. That was a view that had been widely accepted, but he postulated that the earth goes around the sun, and time and science proved him right. It was a revolutionary event in human history that led to no small amount of consternation and upheaval. In a similar way, it's a commonly accepted part of human experience that we put ourselves at the center of things and try to make sense of it all from that perspective. We can even embrace faith from that perspective, thinking that God is a part of our life. But there's an inner revolution that needs to take place to help us realize that God is not a part of our life. We are a part of God's life. God is not a part of our story. We are a part of God's story. We move beyond caring about ourselves alone to caring about others. And if we never experience that shift, if we never develop a sense of caring about other people who are not in our closest circles, a sense of compassion for the lost or the hungry or the lonely or the discouraged or the anxious or the homeless or the abused, if we don't develop those expanded horizons of concern, then it's worth asking ourselves if we've truly encountered God. We don't all have to agree about how to be in ministry beyond the boundaries of our Christian community. But if we have no sense at all that our neighbors near and far matter to God, we have some serious thinking to do. Thinking that hopefully leads to praying. Praying that hopefully leads to the kind of transformation that Isaiah experienced. When we come face to face with the reality of God and the truth of us, and in that encounter experience the richness of God's grace, being sent on mission is the normal outcome. As Patrick Johnson put it, missional theology flows from the conviction that the community of Christ is sent to join God in God's mission of redemption and new creation. Isaiah didn't volunteer because he knew how to do stuff that God might be able to use. Isaiah didn't raise his hand because he had some free time. Isaiah put his life on the line and said, God, use me. The good news is that God makes servants out of sinners. Sin is not a disqualification. The bad news is that God makes servants out of sinners, so sin is not an excuse. When Isaiah cried out, "Woe is me, I am lost," did God say, "That's right, Isaiah, you are a terrible person, and I'm glad you finally understand how terrible you are"? That's not what God said. God brought grace into Isaiah's reality and gave him a new story. Charles Colson worked as special counsel to President Richard Nixon between 1969 and 1973. He had a reputation as Nixon's dirty tricks artist. He described himself as Nixon's hatchet man. In the middle of the Watergate scandal in August of 1973, he came to faith in Christ through the witness of Tom Phillips, then the chairman of the defense contractor Raytheon. In the summer of 1974, he pled guilty to obstruction of justice and went to prison. He said it was a price he had to pay to complete the shedding of his old life and to be free to live the new. After his release on parole in January of 1975, he went on to become an advocate for prison reform. He heard and responded to God's call to work with and for prisoners through an organization he founded, Prison Fellowship International. Jonathan Aitken, Colson's biographer, wrote, he transferred his huge drive, intellect, and maniacal energy from the service of Richard Nixon to the service of Jesus Christ. And here's what Colson had to say about his faith journey. From the next morning to this day, I've never looked back. I can honestly say that the worst day of the last 35 years has been better than the best days of the 41 years that preceded it. That's a pretty bold statement, given my time in prison, 3 major surgeries, and 2 kids with cancer at the same time, but it is absolutely true. That's because for the last 35 years, whether in pain, suffering, joy, or jubilation, it makes no difference, I have known there was a purpose. I have known that I belong to Christ and that I am here on earth to advance his kingdom. That's true for everybody who has encountered Jesus. We belong to Christ, and we are here on earth to advance his kingdom. Only a few, like Chuck Colson, Mother Teresa, Isaiah, the Apostle Paul, Moses, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Priscilla, Tabitha, or Deborah, are called to be named characters in God's story. But everyone who has encountered Jesus is a part of this holy movement. Together, we can change the world with the power of God. Alone, we can change someone's world with the power of God. Isaiah saw God in his grief. Others can see God in us, in their grief, in their lostness, in their hunger, in their homelessness, in their illness, in their vulnerability. The work is not easy, but an awesome God stands with us in the sending. So when we hear God's voice asking, "Who will I send? Who will go for us?" is your answer, "Please choose somebody else"? Or is your answer, "Here I am, send me"?